What if I told you that your DNA might hold the secrets of forgotten civilizations? Imagine uncovering a hidden past that connects you to ancient empires, legendary migrations, and lost cultures that shaped the world. Persian DNA is more than just a genetic blueprint. It's a historical roadmap that reveals unexpected ties between people, places, and events spanning thousands of years. Iran has always been at the crossroads of civilizations, a melting pot where Indo-European warriors, Arabian traders, and even Mongol invaders left their mark. But what if I told you that the Persian identity we think we know today is just the surface of a much deeper story? Recent genetic discoveries have uncovered something astonishing: traces of Scythian nomads in Iran's north, Arabian maternal lineages in the south, and even genetic markers connecting some Iranians to lost civilizations of Central Asia. The idea of a pure Persian identity begins to fade when we look at the science. Instead, a more complex, fascinating picture emerges. DNA studies show that Persians share genetic similarities with populations from Europe, the Middle East, and even South Asia. These connections weren't just random. Each migration, invasion, and cultural exchange played a role in shaping the Persian genetic code we see today. So how did all these diverse groups merge into what we now call Persian identity? To understand that, we need to go back in time, thousands of years, to the first humans who walked these lands. Studies suggest that the very first migration out of Africa passed through what is now Iran, making this region one of the oldest inhabited areas in the world. Fast forward a few millennia, and we see the arrival of Indo-European tribes, nomadic warriors who brought not just their languages but their genes, leaving a lasting imprint on the Persian DNA. But that was just the beginning. The Persian Empire, one of history's greatest civilizations, stretched from Greece to India, absorbing countless ethnicities into its vast territory. This empire wasn't built on a single race or culture. It was a fusion of different peoples who lived, traded, and intermarried over centuries. Then came the Arab conquests of the 7th century, introducing new bloodlines into the Persian gene pool, particularly in the south. And let's not forget the Mongols, whose invasions in the 13th century left a genetic footprint that can still be traced in Iranian DNA today. But here's where things get even more interesting. The latest DNA research reveals unexpected connections. Persian Y chromosome markers, which are passed down from father to son, show striking similarities to certain European lineages, hinting at deep Indo-European roots. At the same time, maternal DNA, passed from mother to child, links many Iranians to Arabian Peninsula populations, proving centuries of cultural and genetic exchange. Meanwhile, Turkic-speaking populations in Iran, like Azeris and Turkmens, share significant genetic overlap with Central Asian groups, revealing a history of nomadic migrations that shaped the region. And it's not just about the lands within modern Iran. Persian ancestry stretches far beyond its borders. Southern Iran, with its long coastline along the Persian Gulf, has an overlooked history of maritime trade that connected it to the Arabian Peninsula, India, and even East Africa. Genetic studies show that many Iranians from coastal regions carry markers from these distant lands, evidence of centuries-old trade routes and Persian settlers who influenced cultures far from home. Some communities in East Africa even trace their lineage to Persian merchants who arrived centuries ago, blending into local populations and leaving a lasting genetic legacy. All of this challenges the traditional notion of Persian identity. Many assume that Persians have a singular genetic origin, but science tells us otherwise. The reality is that Persian DNA is a mix of Indo-European, Central Asian, Middle Eastern, and even African genes. This is why some Iranians have lighter features similar to Europeans, while others resemble their Arab or Central Asian neighbors. These variations aren't contradictions. They are proof of a rich and complex heritage. But here's the real question. What does this mean for modern Iranians? DNA isn't just about ancestry. It has real-world applications. Genetic research is already helping scientists understand health risks specific to certain populations, including Persian communities. Some studies suggest that certain Y chromosome markers might influence susceptibility to diseases like heart disease, meaning our deep genetic history isn't just a story of the past, it could shape the future of medicine. So, what does your DNA say about you? Could you have unexpected connections to ancient empires, forgotten tribes, or faraway lands? The only way to find out is through modern genetic testing, which is revealing surprises for thousands of people every day. Some Iranians have discovered Greek ancestry, others Central Asian roots, and some even traces of Mongol heritage. The more we learn about our DNA, the more we realize that history is far more interconnected than we ever imagined. Persian DNA isn't just about heritage. It's about history, culture, and identity. And as science continues to uncover more about our past, one thing is certain. The story of Persia is still being written. If you found this fascinating, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. What's the most surprising fact you learned today? And if you want to dive deeper into the hidden history of civilizations, make sure to subscribe for more mind-blowing discoveries. Iran has always been a land of mystery. But what if I told you that beneath its modern borders lies a deep genetic history that connects it to ancient civilizations across 3 continents? The Persian Plateau has been a crossroads for humanity for thousands of years, but recent genetic studies have uncovered something extraordinary. Hidden links that reveal just how interconnected the people of this region truly are. From the first humans who migrated out of Africa to the powerful empires that ruled Persia, DNA tells a story far richer than anything written in history books. One of the biggest surprises in Persian DNA research is how diverse it really is. For centuries, people assumed that Persians had a single origin, but the truth is much more complex. Genetic analysis shows that Iranians today are a mix of ancient Indo-Europeans, Mesopotamians, Arabs, Central Asians, and even South Asians. This means that Persian DNA carries the imprints of powerful empires, legendary migrations, and forgotten civilizations. But how did this happen? And what does it tell us about Iran's true place in human history? To understand this, we need to go back to the very beginning, when the first humans left Africa around 60,000 years ago. Scientists believe that one of the major routes of early human migration passed through Iran, making it one of the oldest continuously inhabited regions in the world. Over thousands of years, new groups arrived, mixing with the original inhabitants and shaping the genetic landscape. But it wasn't just migration. Geography played a huge role in determining who stayed, who left, and who blended into the Persian identity. Iran is a country defined by natural barriers: the towering Zagros Mountains, the vast Dashti-Kavir Desert, and the Caspian Sea to the north. These landscapes acted as both gateways and obstacles, shaping the movement of people for thousands of years. Some populations remained isolated in mountainous regions, preserving ancient genetic markers, while others moved freely through open trade routes, bringing new genetic influences into the mix. The result? A stunning genetic mosaic that reflects a history of conquest, trade, and adaptation. And that's where things get even more interesting. Ancient Persian DNA reveals connections that go far beyond modern Iran's borders. The Persian Gulf, for example, wasn't just a body of water. It was a lifeline linking Iran to the Arabian Peninsula, South Asia, and even Africa. Genetic studies show that coastal Iranians share ancestry with Arabian, Indian, and even East African populations, proving that maritime trade routes played a major role in shaping Persian DNA. Some Iranian communities even carry genetic traces of early African migrations, highlighting the deep and often overlooked connections between these regions. But Persia's genetic history isn't just about trade, it's also about empires. The rise and fall of great civilizations left an undeniable mark on Persian DNA. The ancient Elamites, one of the first civilizations of the region, contributed to the genetic diversity of southwestern Iran. Then came the Indo-European migrations, which brought the ancestors of the Persians, Medes, and Parthians. The Persian Empire itself absorbed countless ethnic groups, incorporating their genes into the population. Later, the Arab invasions introduced new genetic elements, especially in southern Iran. And let's not forget the Mongols, whose genetic legacy can still be traced in parts of the Iranian population today. One of the most fascinating aspects of Persian DNA is how it challenges modern ideas of identity. While many people associate Persians with a single ethnic group, science tells a different story. The truth is, Iran has always been home to a wide range of peoples: Azeris, Kurds, Lurs, Baluchis, Gilaks, Mazandaranis, and many more. Genetic research confirms that these groups, while distinct, share deep ancestral ties, proving that the idea of a singular Persian identity is a myth. Instead, Iran's genetic diversity is its greatest strength, a reflection of centuries of cultural exchange and historical transformation. So, what does all of this mean for us today? Genetic research isn't just about the past, it's shaping the future of medicine and health. Scientists are now using DNA analysis to understand how genetics influence disease risks in different Iranian populations. Some Y chromosome markers, for example, have been linked to heart disease, meaning Persian genetic history isn't just about where we come from, it's about where we're going. The more we learn about our genetic past, the better we can understand our health and future. But the most exciting part, we are still uncovering new secrets hidden in Persian DNA. As technology advances, scientists are finding unexpected genetic connections that challenge everything we thought we knew about history. Could you have ancestry from an ancient civilization that no longer exists? Could your DNA link you to warriors, traders, or explorers from distant lands? The answers are waiting to be discovered. Persian DNA is a living history book, written over thousands of years. It connects us to the past, explains the present, and even offers insights into the future. If you found this journey through Persian genetics fascinating, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. What's the most surprising fact you learned today? And if you want to keep exploring the hidden stories of human history, make sure to subscribe for more incredible discoveries. Iran's history is written not just in books but in the very DNA of its people. The Persian Plateau has been a meeting point of civilizations for thousands of years, and its genetic story is one of deep connections, migrations, and unexpected discoveries. One of the most fascinating aspects of Persian DNA is how it breaks the idea of a single origin. Instead of one clear ancestral line, Iranians today carry the genetic fingerprints of multiple ancient groups, each contributing to the diverse identity of modern Iran. But how did this genetic complexity come to be? It all started with one of the most significant events in human history, the out-of-Africa migration. Around 60,000 years ago, the first modern humans began spreading across the world, and one of their key migration routes passed directly through what is now Iran. The Persian Plateau was not just a stopover. It became a cradle of settlement, where early humans found refuge and thrived. Genetic studies show that some of the oldest lineages in the world can still be found among certain Iranian populations, linking them directly to those first explorers who ventured beyond Africa. But this was just the beginning. As humans advanced, new migrations shaped the genetic structure of the region. The Neolithic Revolution, when humans transitioned from hunting and gathering to farming, began in the Fertile Crescent, a region that included parts of western Iran. These early agriculturalists didn't just bring new farming techniques, they also mixed with local hunter-gatherers, creating a unique genetic blend that still exists in today's Iranians. Some of these early farmers later migrated eastward, carrying their genes as far as India and Central Asia, showing that Iranian DNA didn't just absorb influences, it also spread them. Then came the Indo-European migrations, one of the most defining events in Persian history. Thousands of years ago, a group of people speaking an ancient language related to Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin moved from the Eurasian steppes into Iran. They brought with them their culture, traditions, and of course, their genes. These Indo-European speaking tribes, including the ancestors of the Medes and Persians, blended with the existing populations, leaving a strong genetic imprint that can still be detected in the Persian people today. But Iran's story doesn't end with these early migrations. Its strategic location made it a hub for trade and empire building, leading to waves of genetic influence from distant lands. The Persian Empire was one of the largest and most diverse empires in history, stretching from Greece to India. As Persian rulers conquered new lands, they also integrated new people into their empire. Soldiers, traders, and settlers from different regions mixed with the local Iranian population, further adding to the genetic diversity. And then, there were the Arab and Mongol invasions. The Arab expansion in the 7th century brought not just a new religion, Islam, but also a genetic influence that is still visible today, especially in southern Iran. Later, the Mongol Empire, led by Genghis Khan, swept through Iran, leaving a significant genetic impact in certain regions. Despite these invasions, Iranian DNA remained resilient, absorbing these influences while maintaining its deep historical roots. But perhaps the most surprising revelation from genetic studies is Iran's connection to the Arabian Peninsula, South Asia, and even Africa. Coastal populations in southern Iran share genetic markers with groups from the Gulf states, India, and even East Africa. This suggests that ancient maritime trade routes played a bigger role in shaping Persian DNA than previously thought. These discoveries challenge the idea of isolated ethnic identities and show that Iranians have always been part of a much larger interconnected world. Even today, Iran remains a genetic mosaic. The country is home to Persians, Azeris, Kurds, Lurs, Baluchis, Turkmens, Arabs, and many other ethnic groups, all carrying distinct but overlapping genetic histories. What's fascinating is that despite their linguistic and cultural differences, these groups share a common genetic heritage that ties them back to Iran's ancient past. So, what does all of this mean for modern Iranians? Beyond history, genetics is now playing a role in medicine and health research. Scientists are using DNA studies to understand how certain genetic traits affect disease risks among different Iranian ethnic groups. For example, some Y chromosome markers are linked to cardiovascular diseases, while others influence immunity. This means that genetic research isn't just about understanding the past, it's about shaping the future of healthcare in Iran. The study of Persian DNA has only just begun, and as technology improves, new discoveries will continue to challenge what we know about Iran's history and identity. If this deep dive into Iranian genetics fascinated you, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. What surprised you the most about Persia's hidden genetic connections? And if you want to explore more untold stories of human history, make sure to subscribe for more content. Iran's genetic history is full of unexpected connections, and one of the most fascinating revelations is how Persian DNA is linked to ancient civilizations across multiple continents. For centuries, historians have pieced together Iran's past using texts, artifacts, and archaeological discoveries. But now, genetic research is adding a new layer to that story, one that reveals direct biological links between modern Iranians and some of the greatest civilizations in history. One of the strongest genetic connections comes from Mesopotamia, the birthplace of civilization. Modern Iran and ancient Mesopotamia were deeply intertwined, with the Sumerians, Akkadians, and later the Babylonians shaping early Persian culture. But beyond trade and political influence, genetic studies show that the early farmers of Mesopotamia, who helped spark the agricultural revolution, passed their DNA into the populations of Western Iran. These genes, linked to early wheat domestication and settled life, still appear in genetic markers found in today's Iranians, connecting them to one of humanity's first urban societies. But Mesopotamia wasn't the only source of genetic influence. Moving further west, the connection between Persia and the Mediterranean world becomes clear. Ancient trade routes, military campaigns, and diplomacy brought Persians into direct contact with the Greeks, Phoenicians, and even Egyptians. The Persian Empire under the Achaemenids stretched as far as North Africa, and historical records suggest that Egyptian engineers, Greek mercenaries, and even Phoenician traders were integrated into Persian society. Genetic evidence backs this up, showing traces of Mediterranean and even minor North African DNA in certain Iranian populations, particularly in southern regions close to maritime trade routes. Then, there's the Indo-Aryan connection. The Indo-European migrations that brought ancient Iranian languages into the region weren't just a cultural shift, they were a genetic one too. Studies on Y-chromosomal DNA reveal that some of the dominant genetic lineages found in Iran today are closely related to those in northern India, Pakistan, and parts of Central Asia. This supports the long-standing theory that the ancestors of the Medes and Persians shared common origins with the Vedic peoples of India. The Rig Veda, one of the oldest religious texts, even mentions connections between ancient Iranians and Indo-Aryans, which are now being confirmed through DNA research. Another surprising genetic link is with the Arabian Peninsula. While Iran and the Gulf states have had a long history of interaction, from trade to shared Islamic heritage, genetic studies reveal a deeper connection. Some Iranian coastal communities share DNA markers with populations from Oman, Yemen, and even Saudi Arabia. This suggests that ancient sea routes may have facilitated not just the movement of goods but also the mixing of populations. The presence of Arabian genetic markers in Iran is particularly prominent in areas like Hormozgan and Bushehr, which historically served as trade hubs between Persia and the Arabian Peninsula. Even further east, Iran shares strong genetic ties with Central Asia. The Persian Empire's eastern expansion under the Achaemenids and later the Sassanids brought Iranians into close contact with the Sogdians, Bactrians, and Scythians. These groups were known as key traders along the Silk Road, and their genetic influence is still present in parts of northeastern Iran. But perhaps the most significant Central Asian genetic contribution came much later, during the Mongol invasions. The Mongols left a lasting impact on Iran, and genetic studies show that some Iranian groups, particularly in the northeast, still carry Mongol and Turkic genetic markers. But here's where things get even more unexpected: Iran's connections to Africa. While most historical narratives don't focus on Persian-African interactions, genetic research tells a different story. The Indian Ocean trade routes, which link Persia with East Africa, India, and the Arabian Peninsula, may have facilitated the movement of people as well. Some genetic markers in southern Iran show minor traces of East African ancestry, likely brought over through centuries of trade, cultural exchange, and migration. This challenges the idea that Iran's history was purely land-based. Maritime interactions played a bigger role than previously thought. All of these connections highlight one thing: Iran's genetic story is not isolated. It's part of a vast network that spans multiple civilizations and continents. While history books often focus on wars, dynasties, and empires, DNA tells a different kind of history, one that speaks of movement, mixing, and shared ancestry across borders. Modern Iranians are not just the descendants of ancient Persians but also carry the genetic legacy of Mesopotamians, Indo-Aryans, Greeks, Arabs, Central Asians, and even distant African and Mediterranean populations. As genetic research continues to advance, new discoveries will keep rewriting what we know about human history. If you're fascinated by how DNA can reveal the hidden connections between ancient civilizations, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Which connection surprised you the most? And if you want to explore more stories that challenge what we think we know about the past, make sure to subscribe for more content. Iran's genetic history isn't just about ancient civilizations. It's also shaped by the natural barriers that define the land itself. From towering mountain ranges to vast deserts, these landscapes haven't just influenced where people live but also how genes have been passed down for thousands of years. Iran's geography has acted as both a bridge and a barrier, shaping the diversity seen in Persian DNA today. One of the most significant barriers is the Zagros Mountains. Running from northwest to southeast, the Zagros have historically separated the Iranian plateau from Mesopotamia and the Arabian world. This natural wall has influenced migration patterns for millennia. While ancient civilizations like the Elamites and Medes thrived in the western foothills, they were genetically distinct from groups deeper inside Iran. Even today, genetic studies reveal that populations west of the Zagros, like the Laz and Bakhtiaris, have a slightly different genetic makeup compared to Persians living in the Central Plateau. The mountain range limited large-scale mixing, preserving unique genetic lineages in different regions. Then there's the Alborz Mountains in the north. These dramatic peaks, which hug the southern coast of the Caspian Sea, have played a crucial role in shaping genetic diversity. Historically, they acted as a shield, separating the Persian heartland from invaders coming from Central Asia and the Eurasian steppes. This geographic isolation meant that groups like the Mazandaranis and Gilakis developed distinct genetic traits, even though they share common ancestry with other Iranians. Recent DNA studies show that these northern populations have maintained a higher degree of genetic continuity, with fewer outside influences compared to other parts of Iran. But if mountains shaped Persian DNA by limiting movement, the vast deserts of Iran played an equally important role. The Dasht-e-Kavir and Dasht-e-Lut are some of the most inhospitable places on Earth, and for centuries, they've acted as natural barriers preventing large-scale migration between eastern and western Iran. Genetic research confirms this. When analyzing DNA from different Iranian populations, scientists found clear genetic separations between groups on either side of the deserts. The Central Plateau, home to cities like Isfahan and Yazd, has a different genetic profile compared to regions closer to Afghanistan and Turkmenistan. This suggests that for thousands of years, the deserts didn't just shape trade routes, they shaped who mixed with whom. However, while some landscapes acted as barriers, others served as bridges for genetic exchange. One of the most important genetic corridors in Iran is the Persian Gulf. For centuries, this body of water connected Iran with the Arabian Peninsula, the Indian subcontinent, and even East Africa. Unlike the mountains and deserts, which restricted movement, the Gulf facilitated it. Genetic studies show evidence of Arabian, South Asian, and even minor African ancestry in Iranian coastal populations. This suggests that trade, migration, and even maritime communities played a key role in shaping the Persian gene pool, especially in places like Hormozgan and Bushehr. Another key genetic corridor is the Khorasan region in northeastern Iran. Historically, this area served as the gateway between Persia and Central Asia. The Silk Road passed through this region, bringing traders, invaders, and settlers from the east. The genetic impact of these interactions is still visible today. Populations in northeastern Iran show traces of Central Asian and even Mongolic DNA, a legacy of historical movements like the Mongol invasions. Unlike the isolated regions of the Zagros or Alborz, Khorasan's position made it one of the most genetically diverse areas in Iran. But perhaps the most surprising genetic evidence comes from the Caspian Sea region. Unlike the Gulf, which served as a maritime highway, the Caspian's northern shores acted as a land bridge for steppe nomads moving southward. Historical records tell us about Scythians, Alans, and other Iranian-speaking tribes who migrated into Persia from the north. Genetic studies confirm this. Certain lineages in Iran show strong similarities with populations from the Caucasus and even parts of Eastern Europe. This suggests that long before modern borders, the Caspian region played a crucial role in the movement of people and genes. Iran's geography tells a fascinating story, not just of where people lived, but how they mixed, adapted, and remained distinct. The mountains and deserts created genetic pockets of isolation, preserving unique lineages, while the coastlines and trade routes brought in new influences. This explains why Iran, despite being a single nation, has such incredible genetic diversity. The DNA of a person from the Caspian coast is different from someone in Kerman, and a person from Khorasan carries markers that someone in Khuzestan may not. These differences are the result of thousands of years of geography shaping human movement. As DNA research continues, we're likely to uncover even more about how Iran's landscapes have shaped its people. If you found this exploration into Persian DNA fascinating, make sure to like, share, and comment below. Which geographic feature do you think had the biggest impact on Persian genetics? Let us know. And don't forget to subscribe for more content on history, genetics, and ancient civilizations. Iran's genetic landscape isn't just the result of geography. It has also been shaped by centuries of migrations and invasions. From the earliest Indo-Iranian settlers to the waves of Mongols and Arabs, each group left behind a distinct genetic imprint, creating the diverse Persian DNA we see today. The story begins with the Indo-Iranians, one of the earliest major groups to leave a lasting impact on Persian DNA. Thousands of years ago, these nomadic peoples migrated from the Eurasian steppes into what is now Iran, bringing with them the language, customs, and early religious beliefs that would later evolve into Zoroastrianism. DNA evidence confirms that modern Iranians share significant genetic similarities with other Indo-European-speaking groups, such as those in India and Europe. This migration laid the foundation of Persian genetic identity, but it was just the beginning. Over time, Persia became a crossroads for civilizations, attracting migrants, traders, and conquerors. One of the most influential groups to arrive were the Medes and Persians, who established the first great Persian empire under the Achaemenids. Historical records suggest that they assimilated with earlier Elamite and Assyrian populations, leading to a blending of genetic lineages. The Persian Empire was vast, stretching from Greece to India, and as a result, it absorbed a wide range of ethnic groups. Greek mercenaries, Babylonian artisans, Egyptian scholars, and Indian traders all settled in Persia, contributing to its genetic diversity. One of the biggest genetic shifts came with the Arab conquest of Persia in the 7th century. This wasn't just a political change, it was also a demographic one. Arab armies brought settlers, administrators, and merchants, many of whom intermarried with the local Persian population. Genetic studies show traces of Arabian ancestry in modern Iranians, particularly in the southern coastal regions like Khuzestan and Hormozgan, where Arab-Persian interactions were strongest. Despite this genetic mixing, Persian identity remained strong, as many Iranians held onto their language and cultural heritage even under Arab rule. Another major genetic impact came from the Turkic migrations. Starting in the early medieval period, waves of Turkic-speaking nomads moved into Persia from Central Asia. Groups like the Seljuks, Oghuz, and later the Qajars established dynasties that ruled Iran for centuries. Unlike the earlier Indo-Iranian migration, which shaped the genetic core of Persians, The Turkic influence was more concentrated in the northwest, where groups like the Azeris and Turkmens have a noticeable genetic link to Central Asia. Even though these populations adopted Persian culture and traditions, their DNA reveals a history of Turkic ancestry. Perhaps the most dramatic genetic disruption came with the Mongol invasion in the 13th century. Led by Genghis Khan's armies, the Mongols swept through Iran, leaving devastation in their wake. Entire cities were wiped out, and the population was forcibly relocated or replaced by new settlers. Genetic studies show evidence of Mongolic lineages in parts of Iran, particularly in the northeast, where Mongol rulers established administrative centers. However, despite the initial impact, the Mongols themselves were eventually absorbed into Persian culture, and their genetic influence became a minor part of the overall Persian DNA. One of the lesser-known but important genetic influences in Iran's history comes from African and South Asian migrations. Through trade routes and the Persian Gulf, Persia had long-standing connections with the Indian subcontinent and even East Africa. The evidence of these migrations is found in DNA samples from southern Iran, where minor but significant traces of South Asian and African ancestry have been detected. These migrations were often linked to trade, labor, and military recruitment, showing that Iran's genetic history isn't just about conquests, it's also about economic and cultural exchanges. Despite centuries of migrations and invasions, Persian identity remained remarkably intact. While DNA evidence shows influences from many different groups, the core genetic makeup of Persians has remained stable for thousands of years. This is because Iran's diverse populations blended rather than being replaced, allowing Persian culture, language, and traditions to persist. The genetic history of Persia tells a story of resilience and adaptation. While foreign invasions and migrations brought new influences, the essence of Persian identity remained unchanged. Each wave of newcomers added something unique to the Persian gene pool, creating a population that is both ancient and diverse. As DNA research continues, scientists are uncovering even more details about how migrations shaped Persian genetics. What do you think was the most significant migration or invasion in Persia's history? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more insights into genetics, history, and ancient civilizations. Iran's DNA carries the imprint of centuries of interactions between ethnic groups, shaping its unique genetic identity. But what exactly makes Persian DNA stand out? The answer lies in its deep ancestral roots, historical migrations, and surprising connections to diverse civilizations. Iran's genetic makeup is largely influenced by the Indo-Iranian migration, which dates back thousands of years. These early settlers, originally from the Eurasian steppes, brought the foundational elements of Persian culture, including language and religious traditions. DNA studies confirm that modern Iranians share genetic markers with other Indo-European groups, such as Northern Indians, Afghans, and some Europeans. This connection explains the linguistic and cultural similarities between these groups, showing how deep the Indo-Iranian heritage runs in Persian DNA. However, Persian DNA isn't uniform. Iran is home to multiple ethnic groups, each with its own genetic history. The Persians, Azeris, Kurds, Lurs, Baloch, Arabs, and Turkmens all contribute to Iran's genetic diversity. Genetic studies show that while these groups share many common markers, they also have distinct ancestry. For example, Azeris and Turkmens have stronger genetic links to Central Asia, while Iranian Arabs show greater affinity to populations in the Arabian Peninsula. Despite these differences, Persian DNA remains interconnected, reflecting centuries of intermingling. One of the most fascinating aspects of Persian DNA is its connection to ancient civilizations. Genetic traces from Mesopotamians, Elamites, and even early Anatolian populations can be found in modern Iranians. The Achaemenid Empire, which spanned from Greece to India, further contributed to this genetic blending. Greek settlers, Scythian warriors, and Indian merchants all became part of Persian society, leaving subtle but detectable marks in the DNA of today's Iranians. Another major influence on Persian DNA came from the Silk Road, which connected Iran to China, Central Asia, India, and the Middle East. Merchants, scholars, and travelers from distant lands settled in Persian cities, further enriching the genetic pool. Surprisingly, genetic studies have found markers linking Persians to people as far as Xinjiang in China, showing the long reach of Iran's ancient trade networks. Similarly, Persian DNA also carries traces of South Asian and even African ancestry, particularly in southern Iran, where maritime trade brought frequent contact with the Indian subcontinent and East Africa. Despite these external influences, Persian DNA remains remarkably distinct. Unlike regions where invaders completely replaced local populations, Iran's history of assimilation allowed new genetic influences to be absorbed rather than dominate. This is why Iranians today still carry a strong genetic continuity with their ancestors from thousands of years ago, despite waves of migrations and invasions. Scientific advancements in genetics continue to reveal more about Persian ancestry. With DNA testing, individuals can now trace their roots back to specific regions of Iran and even discover surprising connections to other parts of the world. The more we study Persian DNA, the more we realize how deeply connected Iranians are, not only to their own history but to the broader story of human civilization. What do you think is the most interesting aspect of Persian DNA? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more fascinating insights into history and genetics. Iran's genetic diversity is one of the most fascinating aspects of its history, revealing connections that stretch across continents and civilizations. But what exactly makes Persian DNA so unique? The answer lies in the layers of migration, conquest, and cultural exchange that have shaped the Iranian people over thousands of years. From the earliest inhabitants of the Iranian plateau to the powerful empires that left their mark, Persian DNA is a living archive of history. Ancient Iran was home to multiple civilizations, each adding to its genetic complexity. The Elamites, who lived in southwestern Iran over 4,000 years ago, were among the earliest known civilizations in the region. Genetic studies suggest they had ties to both Mesopotamian and South Asian populations, indicating early movement between these regions. Then came the Indo-Iranians, an ancient group from the Eurasian steppes who migrated into Iran around 2000 BCE. They brought the foundations of Persian language, culture, and religious beliefs, which still shape Iranian identity today. One of the most significant periods of genetic mixing occurred during the Persian Empire under the Achaemenids. As the largest empire of its time, it stretched from Greece to India, incorporating a vast range of ethnic groups. Soldiers, traders, and administrators moved freely within the empire, bringing genetic influences from Egypt, Anatolia, Central Asia, and even the Balkans. This movement continued during later Persian dynasties, including the Parthians and Sassanids, who ruled vast territories and maintained extensive trade and military alliances. Then came the Arab conquests of the 7th century, which introduced new genetic influences from the Arabian Peninsula. While cultural changes were significant, genetic studies show that the impact on Persian DNA was more limited, as most of the population remained genetically similar to their pre-Islamic ancestors. The same pattern occurred with the Turkic and Mongol invasions, which brought waves of Central Asian warriors into Iran. While these groups left a genetic imprint, they were largely absorbed into Persian society over time. Another major factor in Persian genetic diversity is the Silk Road, which made Iran a central hub of trade and migration. For centuries, merchants from China, India, the Middle East, and even Europe passed through Persian cities, sometimes settling and intermarrying with the local population. This explains why Persian DNA carries traces of genetic markers from distant regions, making Iran one of the most genetically diverse countries in the world. But despite all these influences, Persian DNA has remarkable continuity. Studies show that modern Iranians still share a strong genetic link to their ancient ancestors, with some lineages tracing back over 5,000 years. This means that while Persian identity has evolved, it has never been replaced or erased. It has simply adapted and grown richer over time. The study of Persian DNA is still uncovering new insights, revealing surprising connections that challenge what we think we know about history. As genetic research continues, who knows what other hidden stories might emerge? Iran's geographical position has made it a genetic crossroads for thousands of years, with its DNA carrying the traces of multiple migrations, invasions, and trade networks. But while Persian DNA shows remarkable diversity, it also reveals a core genetic identity that has remained largely intact for millennia. One of the biggest factors shaping Persian DNA is Iran's rugged terrain. The towering Alborz and Zagros mountains, along with vast deserts like Dasht-i-Kaveh, have acted as natural barriers. These landscapes helped isolate communities, preserving their genetic makeup while also limiting large-scale population replacements. This is why, despite centuries of invasions, the Persian genetic identity has shown continuity. However, Iran was never completely closed off. Its strategic location at the center of major trade routes, including the Silk Road, meant that populations from China, India, Mesopotamia, Arabia, and Europe all passed through, leaving genetic imprints. For example, genetic studies show markers in modern Iranians that trace back to ancient Scythians, Greeks, and even the Arabian Peninsula. But rather than replacing the local population, these influences blended into the broader Persian gene pool. One of the most interesting revelations from genetic research is the deep connection between Persians and other Iranian ethnic groups. While Persians form the largest group, Iran is home to Azeris, Kurds, Lurs, Balochis, Gilaks, and many others. Each of these groups has unique genetic characteristics, yet they all share a common genetic foundation that dates back thousands of years. This means that while Iran is diverse in culture and language, its people are more connected than many assume. Another important discovery is the relationship between Persians and Indo-Europeans. Genetic analysis confirms that the ancestors of modern Persians share deep roots with ancient Aryan tribes from the Eurasian steppes, who migrated into the region thousands of years ago. This supports historical records that describe the early Iranians as part of the same migration that brought Indo-European languages to Europe and South Asia. Interestingly, some of the genetic diversity in Iran aligns with historical events. For example, northern Iranians show a stronger genetic link to the Caucasus and Anatolia, likely due to ancient interactions with Scythians and Greeks. Meanwhile, populations in the south and along the Persian Gulf have more genetic ties to the Arabian Peninsula and the Indian subcontinent, reflecting centuries of trade and migration. But one of the most remarkable findings is that despite all these influences, modern Iranian DNA remains deeply linked to its ancient past. Research shows that the majority of Iran's gene pool has remained consistent for at least 5,000 years, even with external influences. This means that while Persian identity has evolved over time, it has always retained its fundamental essence. So, what does this tell us? Persian DNA is like a historical map, revealing a story of resilience, adaptation, and deep-rooted identity. It challenges the idea that outside influences erased Persian culture. Instead, they were absorbed, reshaped, and made part of an enduring civilization. Iran's unique genetic landscape is shaped by a long history of migrations, conquests, and cultural exchanges. But what makes it even more fascinating is how each historical wave left its imprint without erasing the deeper Persian identity. By analyzing Persian DNA, we can trace back these influences and understand how different civilizations shaped Iran's genetic and cultural heritage. One of the most significant influences came from the Indo-European migrations. Around 4,000 years ago, Aryan tribes from the Central Asian steppes migrated into Iran, bringing with them their language, traditions, and genetic markers. These early Iranians formed the foundation of Persian identity, which would later evolve into the Great Achaemenid Empire. Today, genetic evidence confirms that Persians shared deep ancestry with other Indo-European populations, particularly in South Asia and Eastern Europe. Another major genetic impact came from Greek interactions, particularly after Alexander the Great's conquest in 330 BCE. The merging of Greek and Persian cultures under the Seleucid rule led to intermarriages, which introduced Mediterranean genetic markers into the Persian population. However, rather than being absorbed into Greek identity, Persians maintained their distinct culture, showing how foreign influences were assimilated rather than replacing local traditions. The Arab-Muslim conquest of the 7th century also played a role in reshaping Persian DNA. While some genetic markers from the Arabian Peninsula are found in southern Iranian populations, particularly in Khuzestan and along the Persian Gulf, the overall genetic structure of Persians remained largely unchanged. This suggests that the conquest influenced language and religion more than genetics. Unlike other regions where Arabization led to major genetic shifts, Iran retained much of its pre-Islamic ancestry. The arrival of Turkic and Mongol groups between the 11th and 13th centuries introduced another genetic layer. The Seljuks, Ilkhanate Mongols, and later the Timurids brought steppe origin markers into Iran, particularly in Azerbaijan, Khorasan, and Turkmen regions. Yet, despite Mongol rule, the Persian gene pool remained overwhelmingly native, demonstrating Iran's historical ability to absorb foreign elements without losing its core identity. Another key genetic influence came through the Silk Road. As a major trade hub connecting China, India, Mesopotamia, and Europe, Iran saw constant movement of merchants, travelers, and settlers. This is why genetic studies show small traces of East Asian, South Asian, and Caucasian ancestry in modern Persians. However, these influences were minor compared to the deeply rooted Persian genetic structure. One of the most important findings in Persian genetics is that despite these historical influences, the core Iranian genetic identity has remained stable for over 5,000 years. This is because while Iran was influenced by external forces, it never faced a complete population replacement. Instead, foreign groups became part of the Persian identity rather than overtaking it. This deep genetic continuity supports what history tells us. Iran was never just a conquered land. It was always a center of civilization that adapted, integrated, and redefined itself. Persian DNA is proof of how Iran's identity has survived countless conquests and migrations, shaping a people who are both diverse and deeply connected to their ancient past. Iran's genetic landscape is not just shaped by its history of migrations and conquests, it is also deeply influenced by its diverse geography. From towering mountain ranges to vast deserts and coastal plains, Iran's natural barriers have played a crucial role in shaping genetic diversity. These geographical features didn't just define trade routes and political boundaries, they also controlled the flow of genes, creating distinct genetic clusters across the country. One of the most significant geographical barriers is the Zagros mountain range. Running along Iran's western border, these mountains have historically separated the Persian heartland from Mesopotamia. Genetic studies show that populations west of the Zagros, such as the Kurds and Lurs, have genetic markers that distinguish them from the Persian-speaking populations in central Iran. This suggests that the mountains acted as a genetic filter, limiting the movement of people while allowing cultural exchanges to continue through trade. Similarly, the Alborz Mountains in northern Iran form a natural wall between the Caspian Sea region and the Central Plateau. The people of Gilan and Mazandaran, who live along the Caspian coast, have genetic links to Caucasian populations, setting them apart from the Persians of Tehran, Isfahan, and Shiraz. This genetic distinction aligns with historical records, which describe how the Caspian region remained largely independent from Persian empires due to its difficult-to-access terrain. Iran's deserts, particularly the Dashti Kavir and Dashti Lut, have also played a key role in shaping genetic isolation. These vast, arid landscapes stretch across central and southeastern Iran, forming a barrier between different Iranian ethnic groups. For example, Baluchis in the southeast show clear genetic differences from Persians in the Central Plateau, largely because the harsh desert made large-scale migrations difficult. This geographic separation helped preserve the distinct Baluchi identity and language, even though Baluchis and Persians have shared historical interactions. On the other hand, the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz have historically served as a gateway rather than a barrier. Coastal populations in southern Iran, such as in Hormozgan and Bushehr, show genetic influences from the Arabian Peninsula, South Asia, and even East Africa. This is due to centuries of maritime trade and migration, especially during the height of the Persian and Islamic empires, when Iran was a major player in Indian Ocean commerce. However, despite these influences, genetic studies show that the Persian core identity remains dominant even in coastal areas, proving that while foreign genes entered Iran, they never fully displaced the local genetic makeup. Another fascinating aspect of Iran's geography is how oases and river valleys created isolated genetic pockets. Certain mountain valleys and river basins, such as those in Yazd, Kerman, and Khorasan, acted as genetic refuges, preserving ancient Persian DNA. These regions remained relatively untouched by mass migrations, which is why their genetic makeup is strikingly similar to ancient Iranian samples dating back thousands of years. The overall impact of Iran's geography is clear. While the country has absorbed genetic influences from surrounding civilizations, its physical landscape has helped maintain a distinct Persian genetic identity. The mountains and deserts acted as barriers, preventing complete assimilation, while coastal and trade routes allowed controlled gene flow, leading to a rich but stable genetic structure. This is why, despite thousands of years of invasions and migrations, modern Persian DNA still carries the same core markers as ancient Iranians who lived on this land 5,000 years ago. Iran's geography has not only shaped its history and culture, it has actively preserved its genetic legacy.